Good evening, everybody. My name is Beth Quarles. I am a owner of Paper Heart Bookstore here in Little Rock. I'm also a proud Little Rock School District teacher. I teach 4th grade literacy. And I was just telling Maggie and Dolen, I'm used to talking to little ones, not adults, so please forgive me if I'm talking down in any way. I don't mean to at all. So, y'all, it's been a really lovely day here at Six Bridges. So many good panels. Huge credit to the library staff here for and the talent committee. It's been really wonderful. I do want to take a minute to acknowledge the sponsors for this event tonight for bringing Maggie and Dolen. We couldn't do it without sponsors, but we would like to thank the Repsamen Fund, Mary and Jim Wallib, for sponsoring this evening. Really appreciate you. I cannot tell you how excited I've been about this. Dolen Perkins-Valdez, one of her books last year, when I read it, Take My Hand, it just captured me. It was one that I stayed awake reading. And so when I saw that you were coming, I got really excited. So I'm really excited for you. And then Maggie, I have an employee named Nate, and Nate is one of Maggie's biggest fans, and he has talked about Maggie forever, texting me every day, when's the Raven Boys coming in? I need it now. So Maggie, I feel really honored that I'm up here getting to talk with you, and I'm sorry, Nate.
Where's Nate?
But thank you both so much for coming. Both of their books have been on most anticipated lists for a long time now. Dolen lives in Washington, D.C. She's an associate professor at American University. Maggie has been writing YA novels for quite a bit, and this is her first adult novel. So audiences are a little bit different, but there's a lot to talk about that your books have that are similar in your books. So we're going to just go ahead and dive right on in. I do want to also say that we were also talking backstage, and both of them are play music. So I'm just going to throw this out here. Maggie plays bagpipes, Dolen plays the piano, and did I hear banjo as well? And then Steve, our sound guy, plays drums. So next time, I think we should have a little jam session afterwards. Okay. You both write about the past, but in very different ways. Dolen, you're excavating a little-known chapter of American history, and Maggie, you're blending historical realism with something uncanny. When you all think about historical fiction, what does that term mean to you? Is it about accuracy, or is it about capturing something that's emotionally true?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Beth, for being here today and moderating, and everybody for staying for is it the last panel of the day? Thank you. I think it's both. You know, it's about the imagination. It's about storytelling, of course. And for me, that is primary, because I don't like to get too bogged down in the historical details, because I'm not a historian, and I'm not a journalist, and I'm not a nonfiction writer. You know, I'm a storyteller. I write it in fiction for a reason, and so I keep that first and foremost in my mind. But it is important to me that I do the work, because I also don't want to be out here spreading erroneous information and having people think that that's the real history. But it's a balance between those two, I think. It's about truth with a little t and truth with a big T, too. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
I was a history major. I warn you about this, because what I would do when I was writing this is I would test drive the various things that I had read to find out if they were actually interesting to people who weren't history majors, because I have a very high tolerance for grimy and pointless and dusty historical facts. That's very exciting to me. And so what I would do is, either around the dinner table or as I was going through the grocery store line, you'd be going bloop to my Brussels sprouts, and I would say, okay, I read this thing about a flying ace, and then I would see if the light would slowly go out of their eyes. And if it did, okay, that doesn't go in the novel. That's just for me. So yeah, trying to balance that. I agree. You want to have big T and small t truth. You want to know that if someone goes and types something into a search engine, that it really goes somewhere.
Okay. Do you all ever feel the weight of writing about real people or events, or the freedom that comes with reimagining them?
I'm going first again? Okay.
You don't have to, but...
Well, okay, I'll go first. Then you go first next time.
Okay.
I'll say if they're alive. Okay, with my previous book that you mentioned, Take My Hand, quite a few of those people are still alive. And that book was set in the 1970s, for y'all who haven't read it, and that was the first and last and only time that the legal department for my publisher has called me and wanted to go through the book with me. And the lawyers had read the book, and they wanted to go through it bit by bit. And so when people are alive, yeah, it's a real concern, not just from a legal standpoint, but also from an accuracy standpoint and from am I doing the story justice? Am I creating a fair portrait? But when they're dead, I don't worry too much because, you always want to honor the memory, and sometimes there are descendants, too, that you also want to consider. But I do think that I feel freed when they're dead.
No haunting here.
So when I was working on The Listeners, 1942 wasn't that long ago. And so again, there were a lot of people that were related to people who would remember what happened. So I made the choice that even though 6 of these hotels had been tapped by the State Department to host diplomats, what I would do is I would invent a 7th hotel, and I would instead populate it with all new diplomats and all new hotel people and reference the others. And that way everything I said would be true, and I was just inserting my truth into it. I was burned, I have to say, because even though The Raven Cycle, a previous series of mine, has anybody here read The Raven Cycle? Yeah. Okay, so even though that one is not technically a historical fiction, it has a historical figure in it, as the teens are all looking for a long-lost dead Welsh king, technically prince, named Glendower. And I used Glendower for mythological purposes for this entire series, invented all kinds of capers. I tried to be realistic, but still, I did bury his body in Virginia and then exhume him for rituals. I mean, literally. And then after the series was done, my mom, who is a huge genealogy nut, goes, I want to show you a pedigree. And it's a direct line back, so I'm sorry, great Granddaddy Glendower. Anyway.
Well, this leads me to a question about research. When do you know to stop researching and insert your imagination and say, hey, this is too much, now I need to put some of my thoughts down, or do you over-research?
Oh, I was supposed to go first this time, wasn't I? Right, okay. I love to over-research, I have to say. So I think that what I like to do is, it takes a very long time for a novel to actually be ready to be written, as far as typed. I'm a big fan of doing most of the actual conceiving of a novel before you ever put anything down on the paper. So I used to rush into it, and I was a huge quitter. I would get stuck on my projects, and then I would just have aliens come down and kill everyone in the book when I was stuck and move on. None of these books were alien books, so I just want you to imagine an IRA thriller, aliens, family drama, aliens, amnesiac, enchanters, aliens. Anyway, so to keep the aliens from happening, I keep it in my head. And during that thinking time is when I do loads and loads of research. And then you sit down and you type, and that way it's more of a balance, I think.
Yeah, I think it is very easy to over-research, but I also find it easy to say to myself, okay, that doesn't belong in here, right? That was a rabbit hole. I'm pretty good at saying, Dolen, you just fell down a rabbit hole. You need to get out of it, But the books that I write, I'm typically looking for little small pockets of history, and there's not that much. I'll often will kind of hit a brick wall, and kind of like you, Maggie, I do a lot before I start writing just so I can steep myself in the world. But so for Happy Land, this was a little pocket of a community in the mountains of western North Carolina, and you could only research so much because at some point you had everything. It's not like I'm writing about a really famous event where there's just reams and reams of archival material. And then with my previous book, Take My Hand, which was about these little girls who were sterilized without their permission in Alabama, there was only so much on that too. So I do think that, but there's still, you can still fall down a rabbit hole just because there's some kind of tangent you can go on.
Do you have a favorite rabbit hole?
One time I fell down a rabbit hole of steamships. I had a big steamboat packet. And I was learning about steamboats that went up and down the Mississippi, and they were fascinating. I was looking at the technology. I was looking at all the different ones and what they were called and what kind of accommodations and what they hauled on them. And in my imagination, I was thinking about people traveling on these steamships that also were freighters, you know. They were in these like luxury accommodations, but there were also like bales of cotton on the deck. Like it was just a imaginative dream for me to think about.
Was that even a sentence in the book?
But it had nothing to do with nothing. No.
If you come back to Arkansas, you're going to have to go to see the Sultana Museum, because down on the Mississippi, that's brand new here in Arkansas. But that means you get to come back. Okay. Come back and go down that rabbit hole. Okay. All right, I'm going to ask you a little bit individually about your book. So Dolen, Happy Land, which I want to show you this cover. It's stunning, for one thing. Were you just so pleased? Or how did you feel when you saw this book?
Leading the witness.
Sorry.
I know, right? Well, this is what happens when you're in the 4th grade.
Yeah, this is true. We guide a little too much sometimes. So.
Guided questions. I loved it. I thought, are we really going to do that? Like I often, you know, because as writers, we only have so much say over the cover art, and they'll often present you with 2 or 3 different choices, and then the one that you really love, you're just crossing your fingers that that's the one.
Yeah, you didn't do the air quotes around choices. They meant 2 or 3 choices.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
They tell you, yeah, which one do you like? And then they make their decision.
Love this one?
Yeah. Yeah, do you love this one? Like how much do you love this one, Maggie? So I was really pleased with it. We started with some other flowers that looked more tropical, that made her look like she was from the Caribbean. And so my only issue was like, I don't know about those flowers. And so then we changed them to North American wildflowers, which I thought were a little bit better for North Carolina. But yeah, I think I'm really lucky to have a publisher that listens to me. I'll say that.
I love that. How did you first discover this history about the Kingdom of Happy Land? And what drew it to you as a novelist rather than a historian?
Well, I mean, I like to think of myself as a historian, but I'm not a trained historian out of respect for the real ones. But I was really drawn to this because it was such a phenomenal story. These people had left Spartanburg County in South Carolina under persecution from the Klan. They had walked 60 miles up the mountain, made a deal with an innkeeper to live on her land. They had established a community there. They modeled themselves after African royalty. They named a king and a queen. They extricated themselves from the American experiment and, as far as I know, never voted again. They had their own system of government. They were financially self-sufficient. And after saving and putting together their money in a communal treasury for 10 years, they bought over 200 acres of land where they raised their families for decades. And so I had never heard of this story, and I thought people need to know this. Even people in Hendersonville, North Carolina, which is sort of the present day of where the kingdom was, some people there didn't know if it was true or not. They thought it might be a local legend. And I wanted to do the research and find out who were these people and just sort of set the record straight. But some of it, of course, we don't know. So I had to tell it in a novel because I had to try to imagine what life was like for them. Yeah,
I lived over in Hickory, North Carolina, and this was not a history that I had ever been aware of until your book, and it definitely made me want to dig in more and learn more about. So thank you for that and
Thank you.
highlighting this story. One thing I loved about the book, it spans generations. So you have from Mother Rita to Luella to Nikki in the present day. How did you balance like the intimacy of the family story versus kind of the bigger scope of the communal story?
Well, when I began to write the book, I didn't know that I was going to write it in a dual timeline. I thought I was just writing a historical novel. But I started to ask myself, why did the story matter? Why did it even matter to me to let the people of Hendersonville know this story about their town and about the history of their town? And that was when I realized I wanted to have a contemporary character, Nikki, who is a descendant of the Kingdom folk. And I wanted to ask the question, not only why did this history matter for us, you know, as a country, but why would it matter for a young woman who had this as her family history? And that's really, in my mind, what I do when I write a historical novel. I'm asking questions. I'm asking questions of the history. I'm asking questions of the people. I'm asking questions even of us as contemporary people. And so that was how I brought it, you know, the community together with the individual and with the family, because these family legacies, y'all, that we have, particularly here in the South, this is the American story. Like every little pocket of a story, whether it's in the Ozarks, whether it's in the Appalachians, whether it's in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia where Maggie lives, all of those little pockets of stories add up to create the American story. And they're all important. So when you're in there doing your family history in the library, y'all, you are doing American history. You are excavating the narrative of a country. And it's important work. And it's necessary work. And these are the stories that connect us and that bind us together as Americans. And I really believe that from my heart. And that's why I thought I need this contemporary storyline so that I can pull these threads together.
So what she's saying is to go down those rabbit holes. That's what I hear you say, connecting your family stories with other things that you find fascinating, because we need this to learn from history and carry it forth. So the kingdom, I don't want to spoil anything really, but the kingdom eventually fades, but it's not through violence, but through time and forgetting. How do you approach writing about that kind of disappearance, like the quiet loss rather than this like dramatic fail?
Well, I thought so for these kingdom folk, buying that land meant everything to them. And it was also part of what drew me to the story, that this was a period that when we think about Black history during this period, we often think about lynching or sharecropping or these really negative stories. But this was a story of people that wanted to own land. They wanted to rebuild their families. They wanted to, you know, have a place for community gathering. And so I thought if I had a book that focused on the desire to own land and all that meant, I had to also look at what it meant when it was lost. And I had to say, you know, because Black folks lost hundreds of billions of dollars in land wealth over the 20th century through basically nefarious means. And so I thought, if I'm going to be focused on why that land was so important, I have to deal with the fallout and the devastation of what the loss meant. And those are sort of like the two sides of the book. It's still a hopeful book, y'all. It's not all doom and gloom, but I just needed to tell that full story. And again, when I went to that contemporary storyline, it gave me the opportunity to do that.
It really is a hopeful book. It kind of feels like a utopia that almost was to some degree. And then Maggie, yours is almost the opposite. It's more of a paradise where there's like a darker truth that's hidden. So I want to ask you, what first sparked this story for you? Was it the history? Was it the place? Or was it honestly the moral tension?
Okay, I have to make a confession. I don't think of my novel as a historical fiction. I actually think of it as a nice kind of wallow. That's my genre, a nice wallow. Like, I just want you to wander around inside the pages and then feel a little sick when you're done with it. When you're like, right? Because you're like, what do I do with myself now?
The tension definitely makes you feel sick.
Right. Well, because I feel like a very important part of the Stiefvater genre is that they always take place somewhere that's both aspirational, you'd like to visit, but also impossible. So it's either set on an island, and I won't tell you where that island is floating, or it's set in a town like Shenandoah, Virginia, doesn't actually exist, so it's almost real. Everything around it is real, so you can almost find it. Or when I was looking at what my next novel was going to be, I knew when I broke into the adult field, I wanted it to be a big, substantial project that stood alone. So I knew I needed a nice Stiefvater location to make readers feel really bad after they were done. And I thought, I want to write a hotel book because I'd stayed in a very singular hotel many years ago, and it had really influenced my way of thinking about hotels, which I hate. And I thought a great place to put a hotel where you can almost get to it, but never can, is in history. So I was actually just reading loads and loads of, in that information gathering stage, loads of historical surveys of hotels, and it was a single line that said that right after Pearl Harbor, the State Department tapped half a dozen rural hotels and said, you are going to be hosting the Axis diplomats from DC in luxury until we can send them back to their home countries. And I just thought, I mean, we know the kind of people who live in the mountains. The idea of them being forced to put up with this foolishness just seemed irresistible to me. And then adding magic to that on top of it, it felt like a recipe for success.
There's definitely a question that is at the center of your book. What does it mean to do your duty when duty feels morally wrong? How did you navigate the ambiguity between the loyalty and the conscience?
I'm going to ask you a question. Do you like luxurious things?
Well, sure, yeah.
Do you like luxurious things?
Yes.
Do you guys like luxurious things?
Yeah.
I don't. I don't usually think about my physical form very often unless something bad happens to it, to tell you the truth. And so I have to confess that when I started writing this book, I assumed that I would be debunking luxury. These hotels that they put them up in weren't just fancy hotels. These were presidential hotels. So this is where people who had massive wealth would go and take vacations. And so falling into this world of what does that mean, the difference between wealth and luxury, was such an eye-opening affair. I read all of these issues of Hotel Monthly, which was the magazine at the time, and I read all of these hotel memoirs from hoteliers back at the time. But then I also patched my research by having interviews with modern-day luxury hoteliers because I just was not getting it. I just thought, is it because there's better soap? Like, what is the situation here? Especially because travel was so annoying back then. Why would you go to these hotels? And so I talked to this one hotelier, and he, this one guy managed a property in Switzerland that went for $54,000 a night. A night. And I said, what do these people do that they can stay in this hotel? And he said, and I quote, "You don't want to know." So he said, you knew you were a success if at the end of the week they had dropped $1 million and they saw you at the end of the hall and they hugged you to thank you. That was success. And so what was really interesting talking to these modern day hoteliers is that they were describing how the most important thing about luxury is to be known, to be seen deep inside so you can be anticipated. If you need a towel and someone brings you a towel because you asked for it, it's just service, it's just wealth, so it's meaningless. If you are given something that you didn't even know that you needed because they saw deep inside you, that becomes luxury. And moreover, I was talking to another guy, he was a professor of hospitality. He renovated luxury hotels all over the world. And he said, what you need to remember is that luxury is a game that both parties have to be willing to play. You know that you're coming to a place that can only exist because of the power of the collective. That you have to have a whole bunch of people. It's like a band, something that you can't do on your own. And he said, the thing we dread the most as luxury hoteliers is a bad guest. So I asked him what a bad guest was, and I assumed it was someone who was entitled. No. He said, someone who doesn't understand the worth of what you're providing. And I said, oh, so you mean me? And he said, here's the thing. You and I, we do the same thing. We're both magicians. And I said, wait a second, say that again. And he goes, we both curate the emotional experience. I was like, we are magicians. We are the same person. And so what was interesting is that it clarified, to answer your question, what they were actually being asked to do. You can't imprison diplomats. They were being put in luxury hotels for a reason, to have the exact same level of service that they were provided before. And that meant you weren't bringing them towels. You were knowing them and anticipating them and pleasing them, or you lose control of your staff, and once they realize that they are just doing service for the wealthy, your staff is riding through the mountains and it's over.
For both of you, this is a question for both of you. A character, is there one character in your book that you would want to spend the day with, you would want to ask questions of? I know you spent a lot of days with these characters, right? But is there one that you feel like their story is still continuing even though these chapters are finished?
That's a good question. I wish you told us that one ahead of time so I could give it some thought. I mean, of course, in this book, Luella, who's the queen in the late 1800s, she was so ahead of her time. And even there were glimpses in the archive that she was ahead of her time. Her name was on the deed to over 100 acres at a time when a lot of women in the South were not legally even able to own property, white or black. She was a businesswoman. She was an entrepreneur. They had a very successful product, the Happy Land Liniment. Who were you is what I want to know about her. I don't know everything about her, and so I would love to be able to travel back in time and just be around her and understand how did she do that in a sort of patriarchal world to hold such a high place of esteem.
I'm going to say there's a State Department agent named Pennybacker. There's a lot of federal agents in this book. I'm so sorry. When I told one of the archivists that I was writing this book, and he said, tell me your characters, and I said, well, I'm going to do the hotel manager. He said, great, fantastic. She had all of the moral and ethical decisions, like she was the person who held all those. Who else? And I said, well, I was thinking one of the diplomat's kids, because there was a really gnarly ethical situation with one of them. And he goes, I know exactly the situation you're talking about. And I said, I was thinking one of the federal agents. And he said, God, not the FBI. They were so boring. There was a lot of paperwork that the FBI agents left behind. They wrote down everything. They made everything into the most boring memo possible. A guy tried to buy a stick of dynamite. They made it very boring. Like, it was very dull. I did pick one of the FBI agents, Tucker. Every single time Tucker appeared in my draft, doing nothing, appearing, dressed as an FBI agent, my editor would write in the margin, hot. This was not always the case, however. Pennybacker is who I'm talking about, the State Department agent. They were the fun guys. Mushroom pun. Anyway, so Pennybacker gets to be jolly and fun, and he bumbles about, and he gives June, the hotel manager, all kinds of information. But I had a huge problem when I first drafted this, which is that first she sees Tucker, and Tucker, the FBI agent, is smoldering away, sitting there, hot, right? And then he's existing, guys. Like, he's not doing anything fun. Andrea, calm down. So Pennybacker then comes and he bumbles up and his bow tie is all disgruntled and the dogs don't even like him. And everyone goes, is Pennybacker the love interest? And I go, what? No, why? And I understand, though, because I was piling more things to make Pennybacker even less likable. I'm like, can he be balding? Can he be older? The dogs won't even be in the room with him. The other agents don't like him. He's got a stammer. He's got a limp. And every single time I did, it just made June look like she had hidden depth, that she was like, oh, look at this underdog. The entire problem was that when Tucker first showed up, and Andrea, editor, wrote, hot, June also looked up and in the draft went, hot, and then the next thing she saw was, oh, excuse me, ma'am, and we've all seen that rom-com, right? Like, we all know in the second act, you're like, oh, Tucker, you douche. And then you go with Pennybacker, no matter if he's balding, has dachshunds that bite him or whatever. Anyway, so Pennybacker is very entertaining, and thank God, I think he doesn't seem like a love interest now because, spoiler, Tucker remains hot, I guess, anyway.
This has been the best already. I'm going to keep thinking about this, and now I want to reread and look at Tucker a little more closely now.
Look at Pennybacker a little more closely.
Okay. As readers now, we've talked about your writing a little bit, but as readers, whose stories were you all reading, either when you were growing up or even as adults, that really kind of inspired you to dig into history or dig into stories that are untold?
Fine, I'll talk. It's fine. Okay, so I loved reading actual history when I was a teenager because I, again, went into being a history major. But when I was growing up, I loved to read Diana Wynne Jones, so funny fantasy. I loved to read Michael Crichton, so the real world, but twisted ever so slightly, but they're real people. I also loved reading things like Jack Higgins, so those were those cheap paperbacks that are always called things like Point Blank and Shot in the Back, and on the back there's always a photograph of the author wearing a leather jacket and holding like a golden retriever or a Kalashnikov or whatever. And I also loved reading Calvin and Hobbes. And I think if you combine all of those things together, you have achieved the Maggie Stiefvater look. And then add a history book on top of that, that's the listeners. Done.
Great recommended reading list right there. What about you, Dolen?
I can't even remember my thought listening to Maggie. Oh, gosh, I'm loving this. Gosh, what was I about to say? I'll just say, when I grew up, I didn't read any children's literature because I didn't come from a reading home. And we didn't go to the library. I grew up in Memphis. There were no bookstores back then. There was B. Dalton. That was the only bookstore we had back then.
Dalton.
Yeah, do you remember B. Dalton?
Yeah.
That was it. My mom would send me in there and tell me I could get one book every blue moon. And so I got all my books from Kroger, the supermarket. And of course it was as horrible as you can imagine, Judith Krantz and Jackie Collins. And
Hot.
Yeah, hot. But in terms of history, I'm going to say my first teachers were just the elders. Like, I love listening. To this day, I love listening to seniors talk about the past. And I was the kid that asked a lot of questions. Did y'all have telephones back then? And stuff like that. And so I was always that kid that asked a lot of questions. And at my grandmother's house, we would sit on the porch, and sometimes I tell my students this story and they just look at me like I'm an alien. But I said, we had no cable, and there would be like hours where there was nothing on TV, right? It was like between this hour and this hour, none of your good shows were on. I think maybe might have been the news hour or whatever. And we would sit out on the porch and we would tell stories, and a neighbor might stop by and tell a story. We called it telling lies. And that was my first exposure to like storytelling. And also they would tell stories of things that had happened a long time ago. I had an uncle who was a truck driver, and he always had stories from the road he would share, half of which probably was a lie. But he was a great storyteller. To this day, he's still alive. He's in his 90s, and he'll still tell you something about a story from the road. And so, I can't say in terms of my earliest influences that I was reading historical fiction, because that would not be true. My influences from books came in college, probably, yeah.
Also, what was historical fiction back then? Missioner?
It would have been Clan of the Cave Bear. Mishner, Clavel, James Clavel, wasn't that one too?
Not take relationship advice from any of the books that we just mentioned.
They were really bad too. Like, if you go back and look at those books, woo.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the past. What about the future? What do you hope that readers are going to take away from the stories that you've written, not just about the past, but about how we live now?
That bad feeling afterwards, obviously. I thought it was so interesting what you were saying about finding that true story of the history, but that's only part of it. You have to have a whole story on top of that as well. And that's really true, that even the listeners, the pitch is that you go and say, oh, well, there's these hotels. It's not actually what the story is about. It's actually about a woman who is coming of age as an adult and realizing that this family that sort of adopted her when she was young, whether or not she still has the same kind of ties with them. And so I think that sense of whether or not you can reinvent yourself when no one is asking you to reinvent yourself, when you have to make that choice yourself, is what I want people to take away from it, but also whether or not Pennybacker is hot, I guess.
I feel like I'm still telling my story as a writer. Like, I am. I'm not thinking about things like legacy or what I want to leave behind or what I want people to know. I'm still working, and I hope one day I'll be able to kind of look back on my body of work and say, well, this is what I was trying to do. But right now I'm kind of in the middle of it. But I'll say that, like, in terms of this book, I often say I want people to do their own family research about their own family, some genealogy. I want people to get outside. I want people to, garden. That my main character is a gardener. I want people to, take their shoes and socks off and stand in the grass and feel the cold earth when they're feeling stressed. Get off their screens. That's what I'm hoping, that the book just kind of reminds us of all the things that nature can do for us.
I know you all have questions you want to ask, and I want to give you as much time as possible to ask those questions. So I have one more for you all, but if you would like to ask a question, there are 2 mics down here on the sides. You can just work your way down, and we'll go back and forth. But this last question, it can be about writing, it can be about anything, but what's exciting you all these days?
I have to tell you that I am really glad to be here, like 90% glad to be here, but 10% of me is still back at the Hilton Garden Inn, where I was right before this panel writing a chapter that you guys are going to read and feel so bad about. And I really still, that 10% of me is in my mind doing the dialogue in the back of my head. I'm really excited about the next book. This was my first adult book, and so I spent a whole year reading 100 top-selling adult novels when I made the shift from young adult to adult, because I was reading all general adult fiction, but I had been writing young adult fiction for 15 years. And so I wanted to make that shift in a really thoughtful and intentional way, because most of my YA peers move into the genre. So they move into thriller or horror or mystery or romance because that DNA is very similar. And they're all very immediate storytelling genres. You set the camera down, you follow the character. And so I knew that one of the things that I loved about general fiction is that it doesn't do that. It can break that shape of time and what you are doing and talking about. And I just wanted to have a sense of who I was going to be for the next 10 years. So I read all these top-selling novels trying to say, do I like this? Do I like this? Can I cobble from this? Can I put something new together? And then the listeners was me learning what I sounded like there. And it was very hard to write, guys. And again, no one was asking me to do this. Everyone wanted me to stay in YA. And so I spent a long time learning to do this. And so the listeners was both my learning and my doing. And then this next adult novel was just me getting to be more batshit, just because I could feel more free to be myself now that I knew what the rules of what I looked like in adult. So I am very excited about that project.
I love that you're going batshit in the next one. That makes me really excited.
I'm excited about, like, historicals on TV. Like, I'm obsessed with the Gilded Age right now. And anything that is being produced on streaming TV that's historical, I was just reading this one, and I don't know, you probably would like it, Maggie. I was watching this. It's a Korean historical, and the woman is a chef. Have y'all seen this? It's like the #1 show in like over 90 countries. And she like...
Wait, what is it called?
What is it called?
Look, I'm a very late...
Your Majesty.
Bon appetit,
I'm
Your
a very
Majesty.
late media adopter. I just started watching 30 Rock. Like, I'm really behind. Okay, so I'm reading Updike right now. Like, I'm just very late media adopter. I will get to that in like 23 years.
Okay, I was going to say, I won't disturb you on this, but it's really good. And she goes back to like ancient Korea through a sort of time warp, and she's cooking for the emperor, and he loves it. So it's just like, at first I thought, what is this craziness? I wasn't with it, but then as it continued on, I was like, okay, now I see why people are loving this. It's good, right?
It's so good. I've got more recommendations.
You got more recommendations? Okay, come to the signing and we'll talk.
Awesome. Well, we want to open it up to the audience now, so if you want to make your way down, we'll let you all ask some questions. You want to start over here with you?
Sure. Maggie, you sort of answered this question a moment ago, so I'm going to kind of play off of it. My original question was, how did you make that transition from YA to adult fiction? I have been following you since Shiver, so it was really cool to see. It's so good. It was really, really cool to see you break into general fiction, adult fiction, as a librarian too. Which adult fiction, general fiction authors did you read or stuck out to you while you were preparing for the listeners?
Okay, so I actually won't answer this with specific titles because what was amazing was, so when I was reading top selling, and when I say top selling, I mean they were exemplars inside their categories. So it was not that they won by selling the most copies, because for instance, I don't know if you guys have picked up Ian McEwan's latest, but you should, because everyone wants to know what a Booker finalist looks like. It's going to be on that list. So if you're reading Ian McEwan, he's never going to be outselling, for instance, Outlander. But I'm going to read both of those things because they're both exemplars inside their categories. And so I wanted to know what makes it the best in its pile of the heap. And so instead of an individual title standing out, what amazed me is that between all of them, the thing that they all had in common, even if you were Nicholas Sparks or if you were Ian McEwan, is that they were impeccably prioritized. They told you what they were about and what they were interested in, and then they did that thing. So if you are someone who's in a bookstore and you find yourself in the wrong section, you know immediately when you open a book that is very good at doing that, because you go, oh, I am not, this is a thriller. I don't want to, well, why do you know it's a thriller? And it's because there's all kinds of prioritization choices that go into those promises. Mm-hmm. So learning those promises and how important they were across it, that was the thing that I really took away.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Jump over here.
So, you guys kind of touched a little bit on this. I don't think this is on. You guys kind of talked a little bit about this. You guys mentioned your writing processes and like putting pen to paper and basically until you've researched. I have issues of my own with finishing my fiction, and I always like to ask like successful authors, meaning you guys, what do you do for your pre-writing song and dance? What are your processes? Do you have like the Always Sunny conspiracy board, Pepe Sylvia, or is it like a very neat organized notebook? What is y'all's, I guess, before it all happens process?
So just in case you didn't hear, she was asking about the pre-writing process for both authors.
So I don't know how pre you mean. I don't know if you mean like daily or you mean like before the, like, do you mean like a daily ritual, or do you mean like before the writing?
Before the like official writing of the piece.
Okay. So I think for contemporary authors it might be a little bit different, and maybe for some of your more contemporary stuff it was. But for historicals, I feel like you do need to have a little bit of grounding in the era. Otherwise, you're just writing. And you're like, because the first thing I'm trying to figure out is like, what's the voice of the book? And in order for me to know the voice, I have to kind of be steeped in the moment and how would my character talk, how would they think? And so I don't want to write a bunch of pages that then after I go do the research, I have to throw them out. So the first thing I'm doing is I've got my notebooks that I write in longhand pencil in my notebooks, just notebooks, regular notebooks that I write in pencil, and I'll like exhaust the internet before I go to any kind of archive. I'll just, everything that's been digitized, I'm going to try to, because I got to make good use of my time. And then I use Scrivener as my software, and so I'll create folders. Is this the kind of answer you're looking for?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I love Scrivener.
So I use
You're very
Scrivener,
valid.
and I have like a whole research section in my Scrivener, and lots and lots and lots of folders in Scrivener. That helps me stay organized with the early draft. But a lot of things are in my actual notebook. I'm also making a lot of phone calls, just cold calling people, because one of the things I've learned is that it's a lot quicker to call somebody than to look it up. Just like, ask an expert. Imagine that, instead of me having to like figure it all out on my own. So when I'm talking to them, I'm taking a lot of notes. But mainly it's between my notebook and my Scrivener folders. That's pretty much it. It's not like complicated. What are you doing,
I had a
Maggie?
midlife crisis at COVID, like everyone did, and I shot hundreds of writers into a Scottish castle several weeks, and we erased their creative personalities and built new ones for them. So I'm very opinionated about this, because I did it every single summer for the next 3 years, and then finished up with a boot camp online with, I think some of you guys might even be here. Yeah, you're alive still. Yeah. Did 900 one-on-one 30-minute Zoom calls from September through February to get those projects over the line. And I'm very proud of you, Mandy. Right, so what I learned is that a lot of people want to live in this space forever. So I get very crunchy when people say, what's that pre-writing look like? And the answer should be whatever lets you get as quickly as possible to actually a complete draft. Because the ideal is to have a piece of something that is concrete, because real books happen in the editing. That's where real sophisticated labor happens. The process of making something that is abstract to that concrete is otherwise so iterative. You have to do so many different passes that people love to live in the scrapbooking and planning and collecting and making cute binders and sending me outlines and saying, Maggie, I did so much work, and then having me scream at them instead of saying, where are the pages, Mandy? And so the right process is always going to be the one that, how many points along that path do you need to feel like you're not going to get lost? And that's going to be different for every kind of brain. And so one of the big things that I always recommend is write the shortest possible complete work that you can. Start with short stories or novellas, because you'll learn the process of being complete and what you need, not with that first one, but by the third one, you start to say, oh, this is how I write.
My fourth graders would be very excited to hear that. Very excited.
Thank you.
Short,
very
and
much.
Which
sweet.
part? Oh, getting locked in a castle, erasing their personalities. It's kind of a cult. It's sort of a cult. Like, we're going to die tomorrow.
All right, jumping back over here.
So they talked about like who was a character that you wanted to sit down and talk about and learn more about. Who is a character in your book where like if you saw them at the store, you would go like, oh no, and like hide behind the produce and scuttle away to not talk to them?
I love all my characters, even the bad people. I don't know, I kind of feel like as a writer, we kind of have to have some kind of compassion for even the villain. What about you?
My first answer was going to have so many swear words in it, and so I'm recrafting it in my mind. What do you call these people if you don't call them this? Okay, I drive tuner cars, and they're driven by a certain sort of, okay, they're fuckboys. Right. And there are a couple of characters in the Raven cycle who are indeed these characters, and I wrote about them because those are the kind of people that I ran with. And it is true that if I see these, I remember that there was a character I was driving in my Evo, which, by the way, in case you are wondering, it does have engine number 4 in it. Thank you for asking about this. A nice Albanian man put it in just a couple of weeks ago. When he saw me, by the way, I got out of the car and he goes, I'm going to go and get my laptop and take away 20 horsepower because you're gonna blow this engine too, aren't you? I was like, yeah, I am. So I did. I was driving my car and I did see a character that looked like Ronan Lynch, and he did take out his cigarette lighter and throw it off the top of my car. So it's not theoretical. It's actual.
I do have a question. Did you really race John Green?
He set himself on fire during that race, and then in front of his wife, by the way. And it was for charity. They shut down a dirt oval in Minnesota. And he had a borrowed race car, which he had to be loaded into the window because it's a real race car. And then he had asked me on Twitter if I wanted to race in whichever of my cars was fastest at the time. And so I drove my Evo out there and we raced. He set it on fire because he put his foot on the gas and the brake at the same time, which is not the way to do that. And then he was birthed from a burning car like flaming calf. And I made a lot of they brought all the guys out that normally race on the track so that we could have something to look at, and I beat all of them too. And of course, my ego at this point was enormous, and so I tweeted John Green publicly afterwards, and I was like, John, how does it feel to be the hottest author in YA? And like, your career's on fire. And I didn't realize that the sound in the background was not the popping of my exhaust, but rather my karma bank emptying until I was driving back, and I was eating cookie dough from the passenger seat of my car for like 4 states, and then I caught on fire in Ohio. So the answer is yes.
I'm hearing a big theme of transportation, steamboats and cars. Like, these could be some future things to rabbit hole about. All right. Popping over here.
This question is for Maggie. I obviously read your YA as an adult. I used to be an editor of a YA book website.
Everything is backlit, by the way, so you could say, I read your YA as an octopus, and I'd be like, sure, probably.
But I was an editor at a website that was for adults who read YA. Obviously, adults are reading YA. When I read the Raven Cycle and write hot in the margins, it's for the gray man, you know. But I'm curious about the biggest shift, both as like characters and audience standpoint, in going from writing YA to adult.
So even though in 2015 is when the big shift happened, that is when 80% of YA was being bought by adult readers. So even though it was a very strange genre to write in, because you would know that most of the people buying and reading your books were adults, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to end up in libraries where they're being read by teens. And I still got into it to write for the teens. And the biggest difference is that you have to contextualize for teens. And so adults come, and what makes adult fiction wonderful and what it is that you get to build upon a certain shared body of knowledge that you assume that adults have, either emotional intelligence or actual intelligence. If I am writing for teens and I say a trust fund baby, I have to tell you what that means, because you're not going to bring the emotional understanding of what those dynamics are. If there's a toxic relationship or somebody's behaving badly, you have to contextualize that more in a teen book than in an adult book, because you assume an adult book is going to come along and go, well, I know what that means, but a teen doesn't, so it becomes a teaching manual for a certain kind of terrible thing. So that is the biggest thing, not in a preachy way, just you've got to contextualize everything. It's like a magic system, but it's the real world that is the magic system.
Dolen, do you think you would ever write for a different age or a different genre?
You know, never say never. I don't know. I listen to people like Maggie. I'm very inspired right now, aren't y'all? I'm like very inspired.
Would you write for your daughter?
Well, I feel like my books could be read by high schoolers, but that might be a little bit older than the typical YA age range. But yeah, but my daughters reject me. They just don't read my work at all, neither one of them. So, but they read my friends' work, like they would love you, but they are. But when it comes to me,
I'm always the cool friend.
Yeah, there's some kind of weird mother-daughter thing there. Do your kids read your work?
They think I'm a god.
A parent's dream, man. Wow. All right. Mandy, our friend Mandy.
Yay. So when you're writing historical fiction, there's the understanding, there's the history, and then there's fiction. Is there anything in your novels that is fiction that you're like, I mean, it's fact, but you're like, I'm afraid people are going to take this as fiction because it's so out there? Did you have any experiences like that?
Yeah, actually. Good question. The central conflict of the listeners is about Hannelore, who is a diplomat's kid. And Hannelore is stuck in the middle because they are worried that if she goes back to Germany, that something terrible will happen to her because she's an unusual child. And this entire setup is based upon a very real moment amongst the diplomats where one of the military attachés, a German, who represented Nazi Germany, had a 16-year-old son who had just been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he made an under-the-table deal with the State Department to have his son stay behind in the U.S. because he knew that when they were repatriated, which they were all supposed to go, that his son would likely be killed by his regime that he was representing. And what was crazy about this is that I was so attracted to this moment in history because the German diplomats were not synonymous with Nazis because the diplomats represented, in many cases, a very unusual segment of the population that had been born in Germany, but then had lived globally. So they were in many ways international citizens or had even lived in the US for longer than anywhere else. And so they had no idea what was happening back home, but they were being sent back into this war with their families to live under policies that they had no understanding of whatsoever. And so I think it seems so dramatic that I thought for sure people will read this and think, I invented this high drama, so I need to make sure that author's note is possible. And then I really like what you said, Dolen, about how a lot of the stuff is hard to find. And so I felt like I really had to make that author's note really beefy because it wasn't as much as, you can look this up, because I was in the archives digging this stuff up, so you can't look it up, you just have to take my word for it. I mean, did you have a moment where you thought that in your book that it felt like people would interpret an actual historical moment as being made up, as fictional, because it was too outrageous?
Not this one. Maybe in an earlier book, but I can't remember any specific moments offhand. That's a good question, though. That's a really good question.
All right, we're going to pop back over here, and we probably only have time for one or two more questions, so.
Hello. Maggie, I have a question about your recent graphic novel adaptation. How did it feel for you, being an artist, to see your characters brought to life by another artist that you were like directing?
We were just talking about this in the back. Okay, so there is a graphic novel adaptation of The Raven Cycle that just came out, and the original series is ancient, right? It's 10 years old. And it's a heartwarming story because back as the books were coming out, the fandom was enormous on Tumblr. It was the #4 fandom, which means it was wild and crazy times out there. And there were so many incredibly talented fan artists at the time. And I remember that one in particular caught my eye, Sass. And you'll recognize her name from the cover of the graphic novel. And I reached out to her and said, look, I don't have anything under a contract. I don't know when this would ever happen. My publisher right now doesn't really do graphic novels, but I would ask them, but would you be interested in the future? And we swapped a scene back and forth to just see if it would actually work together. I pitched it. Scholastica's like, no one wants a graphic novel. And she grew up, went to college for illustration, got hired by other publishers, and I said, guys, we're doing it now, because otherwise Sass is going to be famous, and I want her now. And so it was very dreamy to do that. And everyone says, what was the scene you swapped back and forth? And it is the scene, no spoilers, one of the characters has a very contentious relationship with his father. It comes to a head for not the first or last time in the first book. And so that moment of conflict was the one that we swapped back and forth. And if you read the graphic novel, people say, why did you do that one? Because the graphic novel is full of all of these beautiful panels of friendship and the natural world. And the reason why we swapped that one was specifically because I think a Stiefvater book is all about the prose. It's about looking at something ugly and making it feel beautiful because I've wrapped it with words, or taking something beautiful and making it feel ugly because I've wrapped it with words. And you can't do that with a graphic novel. So the process of adaptation was very much about, can I find someone who can take an ugly, horrible moment and tell it in such a way that it feels like it's of a piece of the rest, that we can still be in a place to have good times 3 pages later. So, yeah.
All right, we have time for one more.
My question's for Maggie. You asked Dolen a question earlier about her favorite rabbit hole, but I wanted you to answer that question.
Do you have a second favorite rabbit hole? Because I do have a favorite rabbit hole. I just want to give you a chance. This is your last second?
Go ahead, take it.
Okay, because I really do. Okay, so there was a flying ace that I discovered while I was looking things up. He was called the most famous and luckiest man alive in England. His last name was Tuck. No, it was not connected to Tucker, but still, very main character energy, his name. Luckiest man alive. So he was the luckiest man alive because as a flying ace, it was a very short career for most pilots during World War II. It was very dangerous, but he had been shot down 9 times and survived. The last time he was shot down was over Germany. When he crashed to the ground, the Germans came over and they were going to shoot him, but they recognized him and they're like, oh my God, dude, you're him. He's famous. Don't kill him. So they didn't shoot him. They just took him to a concentration camp. So it's a Nazi story. So then they took him to a concentration camp. This is not the end of the story, or it wouldn't be my favorite rabbit hole. There he escaped with the help of Poland's flying ace. At this point, I'm thinking, why am I writing this novel? This has all of the vehicles I could possibly want. All right, they escape. He gets back to England. And so I want to know at this point, did this guy live? Like, what happened to him? And so this took a lot of digging because you only get reported upon when you actually get shot down. And so, first of all, I'm here to tell you, he did survive the war. He got married, and he had a nice little farm, and he lived like a normal life. However, I did also discover that the luckiest man alive, so he had, his most famous intercept was that German planes were doing an attack. He intercepted them over Wales, and then managed to get them to drop their munitions over largely unoccupied farmland. And so could have been a disaster. They were on their way to bomb London, but instead, only one person was killed. A person who was at the edge of a military base. A person who was his brother-in-law. Luckiest man alive. What is your Christmas dinner like after that? So, sis, I understand that you're a widow now. Here's what I want to know: was this karma like was the brother-in-law a bad person? Was it like, yeah, high five, I've been wanting to do that for years, or was it, of all the people in the world, why my husband? Anyways, that's my favorite rabbit hole out there. Yeah, and steamboats.
And steamboats. Wow, I have a whole new week ahead. So many things to look up now, and so many things to dive down into. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Let's give a big round of applause to our authors, Maggie and Dolen. Thank you.
And a big round of applause for Beth.
We hope that you all have a great evening. They are going to be signing books, so we're going to let them go out through the side door, and you all are going to go out through the back door to make a line. But feel free. Also, Wordsworth is selling books back in the back, too. So if you need a copy, make sure you support your local indie or your library.